the 1996 message, and the sign of the end. Bibles from the 1800s were unique, and not only were many of them beautifully illustrated, but they also had dates in the margins, such as this Bible, 457 BC, in the book of Ezra, which marked the beginning of the decree to go forth and build the wall in Jerusalem. It also marked the beginning of the 70-week prophecy and the 2300-day prophecy also. 4004 was the date of creation in this Bible and also in this one. The calculation of these dates, we owe a debt of gratitude to this man, James Ussher, who lived between 1581 and 1656. From Wikipedia, James Ussher is the most famous for his chronology that sought to establish the time and date of the creation as the entrance of the night preceding the 23rd day of October, the year before Christ, 4004. Ussher's chronology represented a considerable feat of scholarship. It demanded a great depth of learning in what was then known of ancient history, including the rise of the Persians, Greeks, and Romans, as well as expertise in the Bible, biblical languages, astronomy, ancient calendars, and chronology. From Wikipedia on James Ussher. Using 4004 as a starting date, the 6,000th year will bring us to 1996. Now, Ellen White passed away in 1915, and in none of her writings are biblical dates of Bibles that she used in her time were disputed. In fact, comments that she made supported the 6,000-year chronology, such as this one. The continual transgression of man for nearly 6,000 years has brought sickness, pain, and death as its fruit. Multitudes are perishing for a lack of knowledge. The great controversy between Christ and Satan has been carried forward for nearly 6,000 years, is soon to close. And this statement, during his or Satan's experience of nearly 6,000 years, he has lost none of his skill and shrewdness. And finally, this one, thus under the guise, a new guise of the great rebel still continues forward his warfare against God, begun in heaven and for nearly 6,000 years continued upon the earth. The Bible teaches the principle of working 6 days and resting the seventh, of course, from the Ten Commandments in Exodus 20:11. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that in them is, and rested the seventh day. The Bible also talks about 7 years and a seventh year of rest. But in the 7th year shall be a Sabbath of rest unto the land, a Sabbath for the Lord. Thou shalt neither sow thy field nor prune thy vineyard. Notice his other statement, for thousands of years equaling 1 day. But beloved, be not ignorant of this one thing, for that 1 day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as 1 day. So, after 6,000 years, the earth needs to rest for 1,000 years. Revelation 25 says, but the rest of the dead live not again until the 1,000 years were finished. Using these principles, we would have expected that after 6,000 years, the end would come and then usher in the new millennium for 1,000 years of rest for the earth, but nothing happened. Or did something happen, and did we miss it? Look what it says in Genesis 1:14. And God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs, and for seasons, and for days and years. The last sign acknowledged by Seventh-day Adventists is when the stars fell from heaven, November 13, 1833. Isn't it time that we stop looking to the news and things that are happening on the earth as signs for the end times and looking to the skies for signs of the soon return of Jesus? NASA said something interesting about comets. Comets have inspired dread, fear, and awe in many different cultures and societies around the world throughout time. They have been branded with such titles as the Harbinger of Doom and the Menace of the Universe. Most people would look at this fear as superstitious. But are comets maybe a sign of foreboding disaster and doom? What does the Spirit of Prophecy say about comets? Concerning the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, she said, signs and wonders appeared foreboding disaster and doom. A comet resembling a flaming sword for a year hung over the city. So, comets do forebode doom and disaster. This picture is a woodcut, an ancient woodcut of the comet, hanging over Jerusalem before its destruction in AD 70. Another interesting statement in the book Mount of Blessings, that Jerusalem is a symbol of the final ruin that will overwhelm the world. The prophecies that received a partial fulfillment in the overthrow of Jerusalem have a more direct application to the last days. We are now standing on the threshold of great and solemn events. A crisis is before us, such as the world has never witnessed. Now, if Jerusalem is a symbol of the final ruin, and the prophecies that received a partial fulfillment in the overthrow of Jerusalem have a more direct effect on these last days, shouldn't the destruction of Jerusalem be our study? I recommend you watch this video on YouTube, The Siege of Jerusalem, which depicts in computer animation exactly how the fall happened. Remember what the Spirit of Prophecy said in Volume 4, page 440. The whole world will be involved in a ruin more terrible than that which came upon Jerusalem of old. This comet is a modern comet which passed the Earth in 1996. Here's another picture of it, a spectacular comet called Hale-Bopp. Hale-Bopp became visible to the naked eye in May of 1996. Perhaps the most widely observed of the 20th century and of the brightest seen for many decades. It was visible to the naked eye for a record 18 months, twice as long as the Great Comet of 1811, the previous record holder. It was discovered by these two men, Alan Hale, a professional astronomer, and Thomas Bopp, an amateur astronomer. They both were looking providentially at the same constellation, Sagittarius, at the same star cluster, M70, on the same night, at the same time. And while looking through their telescopes, that star cluster you see on the right-hand side was accompanied by a comet all the way on the left, that fuzzy dot, and both of them saw it at that night. The comet was discovered independently on July 23, 1995 by two astronomers, Alan Hale and Thomas Bopp, both in the United States. A tragedy also followed this comet. You might have remembered in the papers about it, Comet Hale-Bopp's Heaven's Gate cult. Historically linked to the discovery and first recorded appearance of the Hale-Bopp is Heaven's Gate, a religious cult in San Diego, led by Marshall Applewhite, who preached that an alien spacecraft was following Comet Hale-Bopp. The cult members believed that transporting their souls to the spacecraft and evacuating Earth, which was soon to be recycled, would permit them to achieve salvation. Applewhite and 38 followers poisoned themselves over 3 days in March 1997 in the belief that this would allow them to pass through Heaven's Gate and achieve the evolutionary level above the human. The one discoverer of a comet, Hale-Bopp, said this: at the 20th annual convention of the Freedom from Religion Foundation in Tampa, Florida, Hale was a featured speaker and discussed the suicides, calling their death pact and other religion-fostered violence another victory for ignorance and superstition. Alan Hale, speaking at the Second World Skeptics Congress in Heidelberg, Germany on July 24, 1998, Dr. Hale discussed the scientific significance and popular lore of comets and gave a professional account of his discovery. He then lambasted The combination of scientific illiteracy, willful delusions, and radio talk shows deception about an imaginary spacecraft following the comet, and a cult's bizarre yearnings for ascending to another level of existence that led to the Heaven's Gate's mass suicides. Hale said that well before Heaven's Gate, he had told a colleague, "We are probably going to have some suicides as a result of this comet." The sad part is that I was not really surprised. Comets are lovely objects, but they don't have apocalyptic significance. We must use our minds, our reason. Contrast that to the Christian Thomas Bopp and his comments. He said, "I never seriously thought I would find anything like that. The chances of me discovering a bright comet, something that occurs once every 20 years or so, were astronomically small." In 1997, when Bopp pointed out the comet would soon disappear from view and would not be visible for another 2,380 years, he said he would always continue looking up at the stars. He said, "I'll never give up looking at the skies. There's so many beautiful things there, and I love to share that with people." Thomas Bopp passed away in 2018, and on his gravestone, it says, "He counts the stars and calls them by name," quoting Psalm 147, verse 5. An interesting fact to note, in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, 1844 is a significant date, and there was the Great Comet of 1844 and 1845. The Great Comet of 1844, as observed from Van Diemen's Land, known as Tasmania off Australia. This comet was discovered on the 18th of December, 1844, and was visible with the naked eye until the end of January 1845, during which time it was one of the brightest objects visible in the southern hemisphere. Another significant event happened in 1844. The first telegraph communication sent from the capital in Washington to Baltimore on May 24th, 1844, over wires laid along the right-of-way of the B&O Railroad adjacent to this highway. The telegraph was invented by Samuel B. Morse. The first message that was sent was, "What hath God wrought?" Communication up to this point had always been at the fastest by railway. Now it was finally instantaneous, even though it was only at maximum 30 characters or words per minute. And so the birth of the telegraph and communication happened in the United States with the laying of telegraph wires, and instantaneous communication, although slow, was born. Now, did something similar to this happen in 1996? Yes, it did. The birth of the internet. Amazon.com opens for business, billing itself as the world's largest bookstore. Craig Newmark starts Craigslist, originally as an email list of San Francisco events. Match.com was the first online dating service. Entrepreneur Pierre Audemars launches eBay, originally named AuctionWeb. Netscape starts the gold rush mentality for web startups. Microsoft releases Windows 95, the first version of Internet Explorer. Yahoo launches. CompuServe, American Online, and Prodigy begin to provide internet access. JavaScript, a programming language that runs in browsers to display dynamic content, making interactive web pages possible. MP3 is developed to send music and audio over the internet. New protocols enable voice over IP. Email in 1996 surpasses postal mail. Nokia released the Nokia 9000 communicator, the first cell phone with internet capabilities. Hotmail launches one of the world's first webmail services. And finally, the most historic event of all, January 1996, Google launched. Now, back to our original statement. The prophecies that received a partial fulfillment in the overthrow of Jerusalem have a more direct application to the last days. Now, when Jesus was crucified on the cross, the destruction of Jerusalem didn't happen for 40 years. For 40 years after the doom of Jerusalem had been pronounced by Christ himself, the Lord delayed his judgments upon the city and the nation. And so, applying Jerusalem to our last day events, 1996 passed with nothing happened. It is possible that we are in the middle of a 40-year probation that's going to end in 2036. Is there anything significant that is going to happen in 2036? Yes, there is. This is from NASA's website, predicting Apophis, which is an asteroid that's going to pass Earth in 2029 and 2036. Twice, separated by exactly 7 years. Look at this newscast describing the discovery of Apophis and its soon-to-come passes to the Earth.
There's a network of professional and amateur astronomers around the globe are combing the galaxy. They map and name every asteroid they find, and so far they've located more than 100,000.
One was discovered recently, the end of 2004. Fine, it was a new asteroid. Who cares? Until you start plugging in the orbital parameters into your computer. You plug those in and then you watch where it goes. You can project forward where you expect to find this thing in the future. You know what we found? This asteroid on Friday the 13th, April 2029, will come close enough to Earth to dip below our communication satellites in orbit around Earth.
This asteroid called Apophis will just miss us on this go-round. However, depending on how the Earth's gravity affects its orbit, we may not be so lucky when it returns 7 years later.
Depending on exactly where it passes in 2029, there's a decent chance, small, but a very noticeable chance, 1 in a few thousand, that it will then strike the Earth in 2036, actually on April 13th again.
If Apophis does hit the Earth in 2036, the effect would be devastating. It would create a tsunami hundreds of feet high that could race across the ocean at supersonic speeds.
It's big enough to create the worst damage to life on Earth in recorded history.
Didn't Jesus say that one of the signs of the times would be the sea and the waves roaring? Luke 21:25, and there shall be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars, and upon earth distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring. Yet another broadcast about the Apophis asteroid.
But it's something that we have to take seriously. This is the first major threat from a giant meteor or asteroid.
Were it to hit us, do we know what it would do to our rotation around the sun and the spinning on the axis?
Well, it will definitely affect the rotation of the Earth as it goes around the sun. The immediate impact would be a gigantic shock wave going out maybe 50 to 100 miles, then firestorms going out to hundreds of miles beyond that.
Firestorms.
And then meteorites raining back down on the planet Earth. So the devastation would be on the order of 500 to 1,000 miles. Think of a bullseye containing half the United States. That's the potential impact. And again, it's a very tiny probability, but we're watching it very carefully.
Because the thinking among some of these Russian scientists is that the first time it passes, the gravitational pull of the Earth could pull it closer, and then on the second pass in 2036,
the wild card is also the atmospheric disturbances. It's going to come right to the outskirts of our own atmosphere. Friction is going to take place, and that's unpredictable. We simply don't know how it's going to react as it whizzes through the atmosphere of the Earth, and that could affect the second pass, and that's why we're keeping our fingers crossed in 2036.
Two sets of fingers.
Isn't it ironic that the name of the asteroid is Apophis, which was an ancient Egyptian deity who embodied chaos, and thus was the opponent of light and order of truth. And he appears in art as what? A great serpent. Physics.org says the impact threat from Apophis asteroid cannot be ruled out. That's June 26, 2017. Inverse says, in 2029, a massive asteroid will come startlingly close to Earth. It will be visible to the naked eye. The International Business Times says this, potentially hazard asteroid Apophis might directly hit the Earth in 2036, a close pass expected on Friday the 13th, April 2029. It says in the article, chances that asteroid Apophis, named after the Egyptian god of evil, darkness, and destruction, might hit the Earth and wipe out a country in 2036, warn a team of U.S. and Russian scientists. Apophis, formerly labeled Doomsday Asteroid, is also expected to make a close pass on Friday, April 13th, 2029. The flyby could be as close as 18,300 miles away from the Earth, inside the orbit of the Earth's geosynchronous satellites. Therefore, the flyby is expected to disrupt communication satellites. If it goes through what we call a keyhole during that close Earth approach, then it will indeed be perturbed just right so it will come back and smack the Earth on April 13th, 2036. Exactly 7 years later, on of all days, Easter Sunday. So what have we learned? That from 4000 BC, the 6,000th year would land in 1996, and after a 40-year probation, Apophis impact, if it goes through the keyhole, will be on Easter Sunday, April 13th, 2036. Exactly 7 years later to the day, or earlier to the day, Apophis' first pass will be on Friday the 13th, on April 2029. Let's look at a significant event that happened back in 1908. The Tunguska Event in northern Siberia. On June 30th, 1908, at approximately 7:17 a.m. local time, Tungus natives and Russian settlers in the hills northwest of Lake Baikal observed a column of bluish light, nearly as bright as the sun, moving across the sky. About 10 minutes later, there was a flash and a sound similar to artillery fire. The sounds were accompanied by a shock wave that knocked people off their feet and broke windows hundreds of kilometers away. The explosion registered on seismic stations across Eurasia. It also produced fluctuations in atmospheric pressure strong enough to be detected in Great Britain. In the United States, Smithsonian Astrophysical Observatory and Mount Wilson Observatory observed a decrease in atmospheric transparency that lasted for several months from suspended dust. Estimates of the energy of the blast about 1,000 times as powerful as the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima, Japan. The explosion knocked over an estimated of 80 million trees covering 2,150 square kilometers or 830 square miles. And to commemorate that date, that we now have Asteroid Day. On June 30th, more than a century ago, a huge asteroid plowed into Siberia, an impact so powerful that the blast felled 80 million trees over 800 square mile area. To remember the 1908 Siberian Tunguska asteroid impact and raise awareness about the risk it could happen again, scientists came together Tuesday for the first ever Asteroid Day. That was back in June 30th, 2015, and we've been celebrating that day ever since. Now, in 1906, there was the great San Francisco earthquake, where 4 square miles were devastated. 28,188 buildings were utterly destroyed. And Ellen White commented on this day, on this destruction. She said it was a special indication of God and the wonderful display of the power of God because of the sins of this recently destroyed city. Now, if the destruction of 4 square miles was a special indication to God and a wonderful display of his power, how about 830 square miles of destruction? Wouldn't that be a far greater special indication of God and the wonderful display of his power? Next, I'm going to show you something fascinating. If we take that date of the impact of Tunguska, June 30th, 1908, and calculate the time between that date and when Apophis' impact is predicted to happen, April 13th, 2036, the time between those two dates is exactly 6,667 weeks and 6 days. So what have we learned? Between June 30th of 1908 and the impact of Apophis on April 13th, 2036, again will be exactly 6,667 weeks and 6 days. We have also learned that from the creation, 6,000 years will bring us to 1996, and after a 40-year probation will also bring us to 2036. It is significant to realize that the eve of the siege of Jerusalem was of all times Friday, April 13th, AD 70. Now, what could this 6,667 weeks, 6 days possibly mean? Well, 6667 is the same as 2/3. Is 2/3 mentioned anywhere in the Bible? In Zechariah 13:8-9, it says, "And it shall come to pass that in all the land, saith the Lord, 2 parts therein shall be cut off and die, but the 3rd part shall be left therein. And I will bring the 3rd part through the fire, and I will refine them as silver is refined, and I will try them as gold is tried. They shall call on my name, and I will hear them, and I will say, It is my people, and they shall say, The Lord is my God." Could it be that 2/3 of God's people will be wiped out, and 1/3 will pass through the final close of probation and the tribulation, which will be without an intercessor? I want to talk to you about the Sunday Law Trigger. Disasters in the past year in 1889 in America have caused hearts to tremble, and similar disasters have fallen upon other countries. Cholera and unexplained diseases have broken out. These things are the result of the drops from the vials of God's wrath being sprinkled on the earth, and are but faint representations of what will be in the near future. This current pandemic we have is nothing compared to what's going to happen, or even compared to just these cholera outbreaks that they had in the year 1889. Jesus said the following, "And ye shall hear wars and rumors of wars, but see ye be not troubled." Don't worry about it, because these things come to pass, but the end is not yet. "For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in various or diverse places. All these are the beginning of sorrows." What does he mean by beginning of sorrows? These things, disasters, remember what Ellen White said, are but faint representations of what will be in the near future. The beginning of sorrows, Jesus is simply meaning these are light afflictions. But what are true end-time signs? Because these things like wars and rumors of wars and pestilences and famines and earthquakes have been happening for 2,000 years now. Jesus said this, "And there shall be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars, and upon earth distress of nations with perplexity." Perplexity means no way out. "And the sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them for fear, and looking after those things which are coming on the earth. For the powers of heaven shall be shaken. And then they shall see the Son of Man coming in the cloud with power and great glory. When these things come to pass, look up and lift up your heads, for your redemption draweth nigh." And he said, he spoke unto them a parable. "Behold the fig tree and all the trees. And when they now shoot forth, ye see and know of your own selves that summer is nigh at hand. So likewise, when ye see these things come to pass, know ye that the kingdom of heaven is nigh at hand." The book of Evangelism, page 29, says, "The inhabitants of the ungodly cities, soon to be visited by calamities, have been cruelly neglected. The time is near when large cities will be swept away, and all should be warned of these coming judgments." Country Living, page 9, says, "Again and again the Lord has instructed that our people are to take their families away from the cities into the country, where they can raise their own provisions for the in the future, the problem of buying and selling will be a very serious one. My friends, the return of Jesus is imminent. We must prepare our hearts and our minds, and physically too, for the hard times that are soon to come just before Jesus comes. And when he comes, we will be home at last. Let us pray. Mighty Heavenly Father, Lord, I'd like to thank you so much for showing us these signs of the end, that we may know the end is near, that we may prepare not only ourselves, but also our friends and family for that great day when Jesus comes to take us home. Help us all be prepared for that mighty day, and that we may be together with you for the ceaseless age of eternity. In Jesus' holy and mighty name we pray. Amen.